Jorge the Hoodlum takes on Gilbert, the hungriest man in UFC history, Burns at UFC 287. And this is my official breakdown and prediction for this co-main event. I can't wait because these two men couldn't be further removed from each other in regards to their drive, their ambition, their desire to win, their hunger for a belt. They want to be champion. Whereas Jorge Masvidal is the direct opposite. This is the big fat kingpin of Miami, all right, who thinks he's Mr. Cool Guy. He's rolling around. He's got the orangutan physique. You know, he's got the big fat gut, the big belly. He's probably eating Domino's day in and day out, no matter what he tells Brett Okamoto. Worrying about all the wrong things. He's in the hood. Now, usually we would say things like, you can take Jorge out the hood. You can't take the hood out of Jorge. But the thing is, Jorge's always in the hood. And he's still at the same time living in a mansion. All right, he still thinks he's Scarface. And this is what I'm saying, man. This guy is on embedded, riding around town, bragging about how Colby Covington wouldn't be in the worst parts, the grimiest, slimiest parts of the city, and somehow that makes Jorge more of like a real Miami guy. Like, why are you worried about this stuff at the age of 38 years old? That ain't gonna save you when you're in the cage, right? You're not Mr. Cool Guy in the cage. You could be Mr. Miami. You could be Mr. Miami. I put it on my granny. Le puse eso a mi abuela.
Sorry, anybody. Welcome to my city.
He's 38 years old. And he's taking on the hungriest man in UFC history that might just be sick in the head and demented. All right, because I have never seen someone with the crazy man look of Gilbert Burns. All right, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know the look when he's got his eyes rolling in the back of his head and he's singing, ah, boy. You don't want to fight this guy on your last UFC bout, especially when that man Gilbert Burns still thinks he can become a champion. Jorge Masvidal at this point in his career, he wants to pay off that Colby Covington case, man. He doesn't look like a motivated, hungry person. He looks like a guy that's been eating Domino's every night, chilling in his pad. Gilbert Burns is out here, you know, waking up at 6 a.m., cold showers, eating grass-fed butter, ice baths, no fap, you name it. This guy's doing literally everything it possibly takes to win this fight. Jorge's got the belly on him. He's showing up to the gym to shed some belly fat. He's showing up to the gym because his back is stiff. He wants to loosen up. He wants to get some blood flow. Jorge Masvidal, you cannot convince me that this guy still thinks he is going to be a world champion. And this guy's already talking about retirement. You know, he's got a foot out the door. He's had a foot out the door for years now. I think he's had a foot out the door since that Kamaru Usman KO. He showed up with Colby Covington knowing he was probably going to lose that. Now he's showing up with Gilbert Burns talking about if he doesn't get this win, he'll probably retire. And this guy's been alluding to this since 2019. Before the Darren Till fight, Jorge Masvidal was getting interviewed by the BT Sport team in London, and he said that as soon as he doesn't think he could become a champion, that's when he'll retire. He doesn't want to stick around, and I quote, this is exactly what he said. He's not going to stick around and get beat up by guys that wouldn't be able to, quote unquote, hold his jockstrap when he was actually in his prime. And if he loses to Gilbert Burns, he's literally told us this week, he's going to retire. The mindsets are completely different. If you were to ask Gilbert Burns what he wants to do after this fight, he's going to say, I'll get another win, I'll get the belt, and then I'll defend. I want to keep fighting for 10 more years so I can provide for my family. That's the real bad motherfucker of the welterweight division. This is a guy that, you know, if he doesn't get a title shot, which he's probably not, let's be honest, he's going to beat Jorge Masvidal. He's not going to get a title shot after that. He's probably going to take on a Bilal Muhammad next, or a Shavkat Rakhmonov next, or maybe a Kamaru Usman rematch. Who would want to see that? I'd want to see a Kamaru Usman rematch. That would be awesome. Would it not? All right, so now it's time to discuss the fight itself. How do you beat Gilbert Burns? Number one, you have to have a high pace. If you don't have a high pace, you're going to have to at least be able to fight at range, and you're going to have to be able to fight behind your jab. And you're going to have good takedown defense. Now, does Jorge Masvidal have a high pace? No. He doesn't have a high pace. And the only time he can fight at a high pace is when that threat of the takedown doesn't exist and you can allow him to settle into his striking. You can allow the guy to warm up a little bit and get things going and set up traps. If that's not the case, all right, he usually starts to slow down. He usually gasses out when people start mixing it up. Does Jorge Masvidal have a long reach? He has a 74-inch reach, which is a slight advantage over Gilbert Burns. But the thing is, guys, he doesn't really fight behind his jab. He does have a decent jab, but it's nothing crazy, and I don't think it's anything that has allowed Jorge Masvidal to control fights in the past. I have never seen Jorge Masvidal win a fight with his jab, ever. Number 3, does Jorge Masvidal have the ability to fight at range? Not really, bro. This is not a guy like Wonderboy Thompson that can dance around you. It's not a top 5 striker. Wonderboy arguably beat Gilbert Burns. Now, if you guys don't remember, I watched that fight yesterday and I forgot. Wonderboy dropped Gilbert Burns with a spinning back kick in the third round. Gilbert Burns was able to get back up. He was able to get himself back into the fight. He got a takedown and then had like 3.5 minutes of control time, a couple of rabbit punches here. Of course, we'll get to the grappling in a little bit. You guys already know I think Gilbert Burns is a slightly overrated grappler. But that being said, that fight was close. He lost the second round to Wonderboy, was not able to grab Wonderboy in the second round and got outstruck very convincingly. And then in the third round, he gets dropped. And he just barely did enough on the ground, just barely had enough control time to get himself that win. And then you're looking at his losses to a guy like Kamaru Usman, a guy who has a furious pace. You know, everyone talks about Colby Covington having an insane pace, like Kamaru Usman doesn't have the nickname CEO of EPO, right? This guy is one of the greatest cardio gas tanks we've ever seen in the UFC, who's also able to go out there and fight behind a jab and a long reach, a 76-inch reach. Jorge Masvidal doesn't really utilize his reach that often. Usman made it his whole game to go in there and fight a guy like Gilbert Burns and Masvidal behind his jab to keep himself safe. Does Jorge Masvidal have that ability? I don't think so. He doesn't fight like that. Jorge Masvidal wants to counter you. Jorge Masvidal wants to blitz you down with combinations close into you in the boxing range, but man, I don't see him having this ability to like put a high pace on you and fight behind a jab, and therefore I think he's going to be trading with Gilbert Burns, trading hooks with Burns, and I think that the 38-year-old Jorge Masvidal is slower than Burns. I think he's less explosive. I think he's not training as hard anymore, and I think he's slower than he's ever been. And the first thing I noticed when I rewatched Jorge Masvidal versus Darren Till, which was in 2019, was the speed of this guy. He was fast. Every movement that he had was, with less effort, and he just looked quicker twitch. And I don't see that anymore. I see a guy that is heavier, that has a harder weight cut, that probably isn't dieting as hard, that probably isn't as hungry. And I see a guy that looks more lethargic out there, that looks more labored in the way that he throws his strikes. I think he's less dangerous because of it. I think Jorge Masvidal needed that speed because, again, when he first moved up to welterweight, he was a little bit on the smaller side. He was moving up, but he still had the speed and the skills of a 155er. And that's what was able to catch these guys off guard. But nowadays, he looks more labored in his approach with everything that he does. His leg kicks look slower. His ability to throw combinations look slower. His confidence isn't there. I think that a guy in Gilbert Burns, who's more motivated than ever, who also used to be a 155er, I think he's going to be able to go out there and be the quicker, faster, more explosive guy. And yes, I don't think he's as good of a striker as Jorge, but I don't think he needs to be, because I don't think Jorge Masvidal is going to be fighting at a high pace. And I don't think Gilbert Burns is going to be in Jorge's face. I think he's going to be sitting out at range, moving around, feinting. That's one thing that I noticed in his approach against Neil Magny. He looked really improved from the Wonderboy fight to the Neil Magny fight, just in the way that he was moving, just in the way that he was feinting. And it wasn't really doing all that much. It was just that he was controlling the distance better, not putting himself in danger against a guy that has a long reach, like a Neil Magny. And I think that he is the smartest and most cerebral he's ever been. I think that Gilbert Burns is going to win this by decision. I don't think he's going to go out there and dominate Jorge Masvidal and just put an ass whipping on him, but I think that he'll do enough. I think he'll mix it up enough to be able to beat Jorge by decision, because ultimately, I think that Jorge Masvidal is going to be on the back foot. I think he's going to tire out fairly quickly when Gilbert Burns starts mixing in takedowns. And although Burns doesn't have the most furious pace, although he doesn't have the best gas tank, it's better than Jorge, and he has the ability to mix it up. He has takedowns in his arsenal. Now, he really struggled to take down Wonderboy. I mean, he really did, which is why I could understand someone picking Jorge Masvidal. But again, because this is the laziest, fattest version of Jorge Masvidal that we've ever seen, I think that takedown is going to come a little easier than a lot of people would think. And I think that he's going to start feinting. He's going to start faking level changes. He's going to make Jorge second guess himself. And he's going to be able to catch Jorge with big shots, hard kicks to the body, big right hooks. Again, Gilbert Burns rarely ever throws in combinations. He'll never throw a three-piece combo. He'll usually just throw singular shots. And they're all hard. They're all kill shots. They're all meant to make you think, okay, I'm in danger right now. This guy could knock me out. And we know he has power in his hands. Jorge Masvidal, I don't think he's going to get KO'd in this fight, but I think he's going to get hurt. And what happens if he does get hurt? Well, he'll open himself up to a takedown. I think Gilbert Burns will take him down. And when it gets there, I think that Gilbert Burns doesn't have the best ability to hurt people on the ground. We've never really seen him hurt guys on the ground. He doesn't have ground and pound. That's very significant. He isn't able to really go out there and submit guys. As much as we like to hype him up as one of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the UFC, He's a position before submission guy. Now, again, it took the guy 4 years to get a submission at welterweight, and it took him to fight Neil Magny. All right, let's be honest. Neil Magny is garbage. All right, but we've seen him on the ground with a guy like Tyron Woodley. We've seen him on the ground with a guy like Wonderboy. And, like, don't get me wrong, Tyron Woodley has a black belt in jiu-jitsu and all that, but the guy mounted Tyron Woodley after hurting him in the first round. Like, he hurt Woodley, dropped him with a combination, and was able to mount him for like 2 minutes. And he had 2 or 3 submission attempts in that round, just couldn't for the life of him get it done in a mount position. And so I do think he's slightly overrated with his ground game based on the fact that he cannot finish people with it unless it's Neil Magny. And again, I respect his ground game. I mean, we saw Damian Maia take this guy's back, and he was able to get out of that position like it was nothing. He just stood up. I mean, that is the most dangerous place you can be in with a guy like Damian Maia. So he's obviously really good with his awareness on the ground, with his submission defense, with his ability to get a good position on the ground in which he's not in danger, a dominant position too. But once he's there, we see him kind of hold on for dear life. Like he was holding on for dear life against Wonderboy. And I know people are not going to like me saying this, but as far as his ability to hurt people on the ground, it's damn near close to zero. And I know he submitted Neil Magny, but that's Neil Magny. He's one of the worst ranked fighters in the UFC right now. We've never seen Jorge get submitted, right? Ever. Actually, he got submitted in Bellator, right? But in the UFC, we've seen him get his back taken by Damian Maia, and he wasn't able to get submitted. We've seen Colby Covington grapple with him, and I actually think that Colby Covington is better on the ground than Gilbert Burns. I'm not saying that he would be able to do bad things to Gilbert Burns on the ground. I'm just saying I think Colby is a better offensive grappler than Gilbert Burns. We saw Colby Covington beat the shit out of Jorge Masvidal when he took him down in their fight, landing hard elbows to the face, big shots to the body, sinking in, submission attempts, neck cranking him. I don't think Gilbert Burns is going to be able to do that to Jorge. I think that we might see a couple of submission attempts, but I think that Jorge Masvidal will make it a point not to get submitted and not to get finished on the ground. And I think he'll make more of a point to stay out of danger than to actually get up to his feet. Because I think that, again, getting up to your feet and exposing your back is very dangerous against Gilbert Burns, of course. And I think we're going to see Gilbert Burns be able to ride out the second or third round on top of Jorge Masvidal. And when Jorge gets up to his feet, he's going to be labored. He's going to be tired. He's not going to be throwing as hard. And Gilbert Burns is still going to be twitching and still going to be fiery and still going to be motivated and amped up. And he's still going to be throwing hard hooks, right hooks, hard kicks to the body, hard leg kicks, singular shots. But I think that will at least keep Jorge Masvidal guessing. So we're going to see a guy that is fighting out of desperation in this fight. We're going to see a guy that is looking for a KO. And I think that Gilbert Burns knows that is what Jorge wants to do to him. I think he knows that Jorge's looking to KO me. That's what he's not looking to try to outpoint me. He's not looking to try to be more well-rounded than me in this fight. He's looking to knock me out clean. I think that Gilbert Burns, like I've waited for that to happen in the Tyron Woodley fight. And I know that Masvidal isn't as inactive as a Tyron Woodley, but against these grapplers, it's not that he doesn't throw. It's that he doesn't assert his dominance. He doesn't impose his will. He doesn't really move forward all that much. He just kind of looks to catch you off of a counter. He looks to catch you and put a good combo on you. And I think that Gilbert Burns is constantly going to be dragging this fight to the fence and trying to take him down and just constantly trying to bring this fight into different realms of the MMA game. And that's going to give Masvidal some issues. And so I think Gilbert Burns is going to win this fight 30-27. Because in order to beat this guy, you have to be able to fight behind a jab. You have to be able to impose your will. You have to move forward. You have to be like Kamaru Usman in his prime. Like prime Usman, going forward with the jab, playing at range with the 76-inch reach, chucking the hard jab out there. You have to be like Khamzat Chimaev, chucking the stiff jab out there in which he was able to use to drop Gilbert Burns in the first round. And I also want to show you how impressive Gilbert Burns' welterweight career is. So we're going to look at his record. The only 2 losses this man has had at welterweight have been to prime Kamaru Usman, who is smack dab in the middle of his title reign. That is a arguable top 10 fighter of all time. So there's no shame in losing to Kamaru Usman in his prime. And Khamzat Chimaev, who Gilbert Burns arguably beat. And for the last year, I've been saying, Khamzat won that fight. He clearly won the third round. He rocked Gilbert Burns up against the fence and had a rally in the first couple of minutes of that round. But the last 2 minutes and 45 seconds, 2 minutes and 50 seconds of that round, Gilbert Burns is beating the shit out of Khamzat Chimaev and slipping 80% of Khamzat's shots and just rocking him over and over and over again. And he clearly won the second round because he dropped Khamzat and hurt him on a couple occasions. This man could have beaten Khamzat Chimaev, because I rewatched it yesterday and I'm saying to myself, wait a second, I think Gilbert Burns won this round. The amount of damage he was able to do to Khamzat in the end of that third round, I think was more significant than the damage Khamzat did to him in the first couple minutes. So we're looking at a guy that really has only taken a legit L to Kamaru Usman. I mean, that fight with Khamzat could have damn near been a draw. And I actually look at Khamzat Chimaev differently now, because since rewatching that fight, I'm like, dude, Gilbert Burns literally could have won that. It was basically a toss-up at that point. So, you know, of course, the fight with Stephen Thompson was close. He got dropped in the third round with a spinning wheel kick. But nonetheless, I think he did enough because Thompson didn't really do anything else in that round. And it wasn't like a hard knockdown, you know, it was kind of a flush knockdown. And you look at his wins, Tyron Woodley, this is one fight removed from Woodley being a champion and losing to Usman. Damian Maia, who was still good at the time. Gunnar Nelson, that's a good win. It's against a strong grappler. Now, of course, Gilbert Burns is grappling with him, wasn't able to do much damage, but again, it's Gunnar Nelson, pretty good grappler, and Alexei Kuchenko, a decision over him. This guy beats people that are on the Jorge Masvidal level. That's what I'm trying to show you guys. And his only loss, real loss, since what? Dan Hooker in 2018 is to Kamaru Usman. So this is the guy that Jorge Masvidal is taking on. And if we look at Jorge Masvidal, who is he losing to? He's losing to these guys that are at the upper echelon, especially the guys that can mix in grappling. Of course, he goes out there and beats Ben Askren. That's basically like beating up my grandma at that point. I picked him to beat Ben Askren. Of course, I didn't know that the flying knee was going to happen, but I saw Ben Askren fight Robbie Lawler, and especially Jorge Masvidal coming off of the Darren Till fight, which he looked amazing. Like, that was the best Jorge Masvidal we've ever seen. I mean, I kind of knew, like, Askren would be fucked if he couldn't get an easy takedown. I think that it would just be a matter of time before Jorge Masvidal would have KO'd Askren, because, again, like, I don't think Askren would have submitted Jorge. It's basically like knocking out an old person. And you beat the left hand of Darren Till, and, of course, you go in there and you beat Nate the Soy Boy Diaz. That he looked impressive in. I'm not taking anything away from him. He looked fantastic in that fight. This is prime Masvidal. But then he goes out there and gets dominated by Kamaru Usman. He wins the first round, gasses out, takes it on short notice, fights Kamaru Usman basically a year later, gets destroyed, humiliated, dominated the entire fight. That was a total washout. You know, Jorge didn't have any success in that fight. And of course, he gets beaten up by Colby Covington. Still had some good moments in the Colby fight, but again, like, when he's fighting guys that are mixing it up, he cannot get settled into the striking, and therefore, if the knockout doesn't come, you're basically screwed and you're going to lose a decision. He lost to Stephen Thompson. He lost to Damian Maia. He beat Donald Cerrone. Again, pure strikers, Donald Cerrone, Jake Ellenberger. But he's losing to guys that can mix it up. And Jorge Masvidal just simply hasn't beaten anyone throughout his whole career that is at the Gilbert Burns level. Again, Gilbert Burns has literally only really lost to Kamaru Usman at welterweight. Because I'm a big Khamzat fan. I can no longer look at that Khamzat fight and say that's a loss for him. Simple as. I think he's going to go out there and just be the better, more complete fighter. This is a higher tier guy that still believes in himself, that's still hungry, for God's sakes. He's a hungry man who has a demented look in his face. He's terrifying for a guy who is the big fat orangutan of the division, the fat cat, who's showing up for pizza money, basically. You guys already know what's going to happen. So my official prediction is in 30-27 for Gilbert Burns by decision. I don't think he's going to blow Masvidal out the water or anything like that. I just think he's going to be able to mix it up and frustrate Masvidal, drain the energy of Jorge Masvidal, pick his shots, rock Masvidal at times, mix in the takedowns. I don't think he's going to submit Jorge. Just because, again, I think if you were to look at this guy's stats as a grappler, if it were a video game, it would be maxed out everywhere except for the submission offense and the ground and pound. But again, I think that control time is going to rack up. I think he's going to have the better gas tank. I think he's going to have more motivation and more drive to really put his foot on the gas. And I think Gilbert Burns is one of the most underrated legacies. That's what I think. I think his resume at welterweight is extremely underrated. He truly is one of the best welterweights in the world. Jorge Masvidal at this point in his career, he's not, and he's never been able to beat a guy like Gilbert Burns, and I don't think he will now at the age of 38. So until next time.